like to welcome everyone to MTRI's May Sitback Seminar. My name is Chad Simmons, and I'm an ecologist here at the Mercy Topiatic Research Institute. But before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that MTRI is in, and we are meeting from Gespewick, one of the 7 districts of Mi'kma'ki, homeland of the Mi'kmaq people. We acknowledge the treaties of peace and friendship, and we want to thank the Mi'kmaq people for their generosity in sharing their homeland with us. So for anyone unaware, MTRI is a research-based nonprofit, and we are nestled in the heart of Southwest Nova Scotia, just down the road from Ketchimakujik National Park and National Historic Site, and within the Southwest Nova Scotia Biosphere Reserve. Our mission is to promote, conserve, and sustain biodiversity in Gespewick, as well as beyond. So tonight, I would like to welcome Jennika Hunsinger. She is the Land Trust and Outreach Manager at the Medway Community Forest Co-op. So next, I'm going to hand the seminar over to Jennika. But before that, I'd like to remind everyone to please keep your mics muted. And if you have any questions during the talk, you can type them into the chat window or wait until the end where we have a dedicated question period. So with that, Jennika.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Chad. Hi, everyone. Thanks for tuning in this evening. As Chad said, I'm the Land Trust and Outreach Manager at the Medway Community Forest Co-op, and I've been working for about the last year, more focused on launching and developing the Nova Scotia Working Woodlands Trust. And I'm just going to turn my camera off. I'm just returning from a vacation. I was visiting BC for the last 2 weeks, and my cats keep jumping on me, but that's just common cat practice, I guess. They just missed me. So just gonna power on here. All right, let's see if my slides will move. All right, so a little bit about me. I'm based here in Caledonia, not too far from the Mercy Topiatic Research Institute, and I've been working in the area for about the last 4 years or so. I started working at MCFC as a research intern during my master's, where I was researching forest conservation and setting up biodiversity study plots in the Medway Community Forest license area. I will introduce to you MCFC if you're unfamiliar with us. It's a community-based cooperative that manages 15,000 hectares of Crown lands in Annapolis County, and it's piloting alternatives to traditional Crown land management, all while balancing multiple values and practicing ecologically based forest management. So MCFC is managed by a voluntary board of directors with 2 seats for representatives for each economic, ecological, social, and First Nations, as well as 2 seats for members at large. And the development of a new land trust has really come out of a need, as we've heard from members, community members, and woodland owners around, that there's an issue around succession planning and who will continue forest management after their time, or a fear of what may happen to their woodlands that they have loved and cherished and built, resilient, healthy forests. Who owns the land after them is quite concerning for a number of folks. And with such a large portion of private forest lands in Nova Scotia by this aging population, some sort of protection mechanism has been addressed as a need. And so MCFC has always intended to serve private woodlot owners in some way or another. And for the past 3 or so years, we've been incubating this new land trust. Just going to throw up this slide really quick, or I made a note here actually not to forget on the side of MCFC before I switch gears to land trust. We do have our annual general meeting this Saturday. And because it is a member-based co-op, we invite the community, either current members or new members or anyone who may be interested to learn more about community forestry or get involved. It's this Saturday at the Maitland Bridge Community Hall, so not far from Ketchimakujik National Park. We have a special guest speaker, Melissa Labrador, sharing about her work If you're interested in joining out on Saturday, the morning will be spent at the hall, and the afternoon after lunch, we're going to go walk a new trail that we're working to launch. That'll also be a campground. So you can check out any of our social media pages or email info@medwaycommunityforest.com if you're interested in joining us on Saturday. Okay, back on track. I just wanted to throw up a quick snapshot of the Land Trust's board of directors and team. We are a small but mighty team. Myself and Matt Miller is the general manager for the community forest. And we do have some job postings up now as we're looking to grow and hire on an executive director. And a few other positions will be opening in the coming months. So for both MCFC and this new land trust, integrating Mi'kmaq values is such an important aspect of land stewardship. And with steps toward reconciliation, as settler-based organizations, we acknowledge that the conservation movement in Canada has largely benefited from the appropriation of Indigenous lands, and that these colonial systems have historically created barriers for Indigenous people to access private lands. So I like to sort of start off the presentation by sort of how we've set ourselves up and taking some reflections as well as commitments to moving forward to continue to educating ourselves and to work with land and the landowners that we work with to continue to listen and learn from Indigenous partners, as well as to integrate traditional uses on easement properties, as well as two-eyed seeing into management practices, which brings together both principles of Indigenous management and past traditional practices, as well as science. Western science. As well, this new land trust will create opportunities to donate lands to Indigenous communities and to promote open access on easement properties. Generally, we commit to continue to build relationships and alleviate barriers and to continue to have hard conversations and really just all come together on a path of reconciliation. So on that same note, traditionally we may have said woodlot, and now we're trying to change language to woodland to incorporate a diversity of values. And when switching to owner from the language of woodland owner to steward, and recognizing that the concept of private ownership was unfamiliar to the original inhabitants of Mi'kmaq, the Mi'kmaq people. And using the expression woodland stewards acknowledges that private lands may never have been legally ceded or sold to settlers. And we ask private woodland owners to reconsider their relationship with private woodland ownership as a concept, and instead vow to act as stewards to the forest and maintaining it as a resource for future generations. So why are we building a woodland trust in the first place? Nova Scotia is so unique for so many reasons. I've definitely felt that coming home from British Columbia and coast to coast, such different environments and different cultures and people. But the land ownership is quite unique here, and such a high proportion of private lands, particularly forest private lands. And the majority of land stewards are in retirement age with no clear succession plan for who will manage their woodlands after their time. So we heard from community members and woodland stewards around us a few different scenarios that were predominantly happening which had resulted in poor forestry practices, either their neighbors or friends that they knew or concerns that they had. And the first is that the new owners, maybe the children who inherit the land, are displaced from the forest, maybe living in urban environments or in another province. And so they may not be interested or able to continue forest management of the lands that they now own. And so they may just sell the property to the highest bidder. And that's where they had seen some poor forestry practices occur. The second scenario that we heard reoccurring is when lands change hands, there's capital gains tax that apply for that new income. And landowners may be forced to cut a large portion of the woodlands in order to cover that new tax that falls on their lap. So the land trust aims to help support a diversity of revenue for landowners to not need to sort of liquidate the bank or the forest asset that they have in order to cover that, but to have alternative means. And the third just sort of covers general and along a similar tone, and when landowners may liquidate the woodlot to help pay for retirement or any large purchases, sending the kids to university or whatnot. But the easement that this new land trust will hold serves to protect forest health and uphold stewardship legacies to support a diversity of revenue generating opportunities, ensure that forest health comes first. So there's a number of problems that we've seen as well, in addition to risks of land changing hands. Some other common threats to forests include land conversion, where in our top left photo here, we have a picture of a clear cut or a liquidated area, liquidation logging. In the independent review of forest practices in our province, which occurred a few years ago now, Dr. Leahy reported that nearly 90% of harvesting on private land was clear cutting. So it is a huge problem. We now know through a lot of publications and science and evidence-based learnings that clear cutting doesn't emulate natural disturbances in the Wabanaki Acadian forest. It's not a suitable practice for that reason. Small-scale disturbances like wind or pests emulate forest regenerating more accurately. So lighter, soft touch, or uneven age forest management is more suitable. Getting back on track here, the top right photo just is depicting agriculture conversion of forests for agriculture, and there's a blueberry field. And on the bottom is the Malega Lakes area, which is not far from where we're based here. And you can see around the lakes subdivision, breaking up really important coastal forests and unique habitat for small second homes or cottage properties, can often reduce forest canopy as well as habitat. So big picture here, the vision for building a working woodlands trust really aims to benefit the wider community as well as the environment, with an aim to maintain forest cover and to grow quality forest products for the long term to help sustain income over time, opposed to liquidation logging. As well, to promote landscape connectivity and improve the health of Nova Scotia's watersheds by maintaining forests across the entire area beyond the boundary of an individual property. And it aims to promote ecological forestry through improved forest management and climate adaptive silviculture. As well as benefits to the wider community in Nova Scotia and the environment. The intention is to support woodland stewards themselves by upholding their stewardship legacy and forest health. I think I repeat stewardship legacy a number of times, and for many folks that we meet, they may be 5th generation woodland owners or 7th generation woodland owners, and that there is this long multi-generational forest management and stewardship practice that gets passed down, and where that can all change really quickly. So maintaining that is really important. The easement allows for sustainable harvesting, and it ties a forest management plan and the land steward's goals to the property in perpetuity, so that regardless of who owns the land down the line, it's held to that standard. It would never be subdivided or converted, and forest management may occur, but tied back to ecosystem multi-value forest management practices, which I will share in a moment a definition a bit about what that means and what that looks like. As lands change hands, the Land Trust and SWWT will provide support and resources to new landowners to ensure continuity of management and support for new landowners. As well, the Land Trust will provide access to carbon markets and a diversity of opportunities for landowners. And there's more on that coming up. It's a big topic. So these working forest easements will be upheld through the Community Easements Act and intend to complement existing traditional conservation-focused land trusts and the new Mi'kmaq Land Trust as well. And these easements will be upheld through annual monitoring and stewardship and with an endowment and legal defense fund. The trust will also own land through direct acquisition or purchase and accept donated lands. So the community easement is a legally binding agreement between the land trust and the landowner. And like I said, it's tied to the property deed in perpetuity. And within that agreement are agreed practices and limitations to future property development and natural resource extraction. There's a note there, sort of in this orange color, that the land trust will not serve to provide forest management services, but that will be provided through an existing regional network of service providers. That includes folks like the Western Woodlot Services Co-op, the Cape Breton Private Land Partnership, and others. I have a snapshot here of those partner organizations where the woodland stewards will work with partners to facilitate management planning, contracts for harvesting and silviculture, as well as support operations supervision. As well, this new land trust, Nova Scotia Working with Lands Trust, is a member of the Family Forest Network, as is the Mersey Tobiatic Research Institute. And it's an initiative of Nova Scotia Woodlot Owners and Operators Association, helping to pilot ecological forestry on small private woodland. So it's a group of 11 organizations coming together for ecosystem-based management on private lands. All right, so diving into these agreed practices, we'll start by looking at land zoning. And we recognize that many woodlands are multi-purpose, and that in the easement drafting phase, we can carve out any areas where maybe development may be intended in the future, as well as we can exclude out the house or the residential zone, any agricultural lands, including Christmas tree farming. That would all be excluded from the easement, and within the easement would include any of the forest intended for ecosystem-based management in the working forest zone, as well as an opportunity for private woodland owners to set aside or to delineate out conservation zones, because most landowners have set-asides anyways, and so by putting that in the easement structure, we can ensure that that continues on far into the future. And so there's a portion of forever wild zones within the easement as well. And there are some exceptions for sort of small recreational off-grid cabins to be included within both zones as well. Let me just see. So the agreed practices within the working forest zone, permitted activities include any low impact hiking, trail clearing, foraging. Any of those activities are welcome in any of the forest zone and conservation zone. The restricted activities outline These restricted activities require a 60-day notification, but in the conservation zones, they become prohibited. And it includes forest harvesting, new road construction, any restoration projects, and just requires that 60-day notice to the land trust so that there's transparency and an awareness of work being done in the woods. Prohibited activities within the easement across the entire forest zones include subdivision, liquidation, or unsustainable harvesting practices. So just pop up there where those restricted activities are no longer available for conservation zones. So I just want to describe a little bit around what we consider to be ecological forestry. And so you can get a better idea of the types of practices that could occur in a community easement working forest zone. So it's any merchantable and non-merchantable forestry activities and silviculture that considers climate adaptivity and mimics natural disturbances while maintaining biodiversity features and ecological function, as well as preserving those forever wild zones as delineated at the time of easement creation. And prohibited on easement properties is any unsustainable or ecologically inappropriate forestry practices, which includes clear cutting, overstory removal, or the removal of permanent retention features within any forestry activity. So this is a new land trust, and I mentioned that it will be through the Community Easements Act, which is a relatively new act. It came to be in Nova Scotia in 2012. And within it, there is a section or an interest for community easements to support working woodlands, as well as a number of other interests. So there are a number of organizations that hold community easements for other interests, but to date, no organization has come forward to hold working forest easements. So we put in an application to be added to the act. It requires ministerial and cabinet approval to be added as an eligible body to hold these acts. So we applied just over 2 years ago. With a change in government and other hurdles to jump, we are at a stage where we've been developing this land trust and building a foundation and doing a bit of outreach. And we're prepared to launch and begin holding easements. And we're just waiting on being added to the act or figuring out a way in which we can hold easements with some exception. So in the coming few months, we're hoping to have a clear direction from our minister, the Department of Natural Resources and Renewables, on a path forward. But as we look to launch this new land trust, we intend to do so on over 10,000 acres of private lands across the province. And launching with 10,000 acres in our first and early years of this new land trust, the acquisition requirements of the properties that we're looking for early on are 50 acres or larger. And there's a little note there, the bigger the better, being more impactful, as well as being able to cluster easement properties together is really advantageous. As well, we'd be looking for properties that are comprised of 50% or more natural forest, more mature forests, 50% or more mature, and that being over 40 years of age and either in a managed or natural state. For a property to be eligible for an easement, it must first obtain a FSC certified forest management plan by one of those partner organizations that I mentioned earlier on here. And some additional nice to haves are things that benefits landscape conservation are if the property adds to contiguous forested landscapes, or it is adjacent to an existing easement or protected area, If it provides public access to recreation infrastructure, a property with minimal human structures, buildings, etc., and with the presence of wildlife or special habitat features is advantageous as well. And as we chat with landowners, and we have sort of a decision support key to flow through and chat with landowners and get to know what their values and interests and intentions are for the woodlands. And we can help direct them to whichever land trust may or opportunity may make most sense for them, whether it's to push them towards the Nova Scotia Nature Trust or the Nature Conservancy of Canada, if pure conservation is the intention, as well as directing them to the Nova Scotia or the new Mi'kmaq Land Trust as well, if that makes most sense. So managing easements in perpetuity is expensive. We know that. And it's great to be able to build this new land trust. We aren't reinventing the wheel or making this up as we go. It's great we can look to existing working woodland trusts just south of the border. Also in the Wabanaki Acadian Forest region in Maine and Vermont. There are numerous working woodlands trusts that have existed for decades and have been really successful. So we've been able to learn a lot from them and how to be able to offer similar opportunities for land stewards in our province here in Nova Scotia. But we know there's a cost to doing so. So the cost of an endowment is largely dependent on the woodland size as well as the risk of infractions. And the primary costs include annual monitoring, which would be boots on the ground, having a site visit and going across the lands, as well as any liability costs for negotiations and a legal defense. So we estimate that the lifetime cost of upholding an easement is about $100 an acre. So this is sort of where we have turned to carbon credits and the carbon offset market. Instead of asking landowners to cover $100 an acre to protect their forests, being able to sell the carbon offsets, we'll be able to fund the easement endowment, and then additional revenue can support any of those other intentions for the land or any other costs that the landowners may have. So the Nova Scotia Working Woodlands Trust will serve as an aggregator and bringing together a network of woodlands to equate to a minimum of 10,000 acres in order to access the carbon market. Today, individuals who own less than 10,000 acres are unable to access the voluntary carbon market just due to scale. So that scale is required for project feasibility in order to bring a substantial carbon credit volume to the market. So NSWWT will keep track of each property's carbon volume and revenue, and the revenue will cover the endowment fees. It's expected to cover it at least twofold within the first 2 to 3 years of a 20-year payout. And the additional revenue would be returned back to landowners or an opportunity to donate to the organization to support additional woodland purchases. So looking at carbon offsets and the working forests, carbon agreement is signed prior to the easement agreement. The carbon is separate and it's a 40-year term. There's an agreement between the land trust and a carbon developer that we'll work with, as well as an agreement between the land trust and the landowners themselves. And as we launch, and we can continue to grow that pool over the first 2 years of it. So if we have 10,000 acres on day one, it can continue to grow for 2 years. And then we have an opportunity to start a new carbon offset pool down the line. So these two programs work really well together. It wasn't sort of our initial intention, building the land trust, we didn't think carbon offsets was the solution right from the beginning, but it's come to make a lot of sense in that they're both tailored around improved forest management practices, where stewardship and silvicultural practices promote healthy forest and tree growth, where more carbon is stored through careful management, and stands are improved. The resiliency is improved to climate risks. So the land trust easements will secure forest carbon in perpetuity. Through annual monitoring and infractions, they can be remediated. So the easement lasts a lifetime, or lasts forever in perpetuity, but the carbon piece is a 40-year term with a 20-year payout. The first 20 years is where you would see revenue generated. I like to throw up just a quick snapshot. When you're talking to woodland owners, everyone wants to just see what the dollar values look like. And this is a scenario. It's a really conservative scenario based off of actual carbon volumes in our region, in Wabanaki Acadian Forest region. And really what it aims to highlight is that the endowment is a portion of the carbon revenue, and that landowners will generate revenue once the endowment is met. So that is kind of my full explanation around this new land trust, sort of the reasons why we've been building this new opportunity for landowners. Really, our hope is to add a new tool to the land conservation toolkit to be able to offer landowners some way to secure their forests and that stewardship legacy, while still maintaining access to economic benefits through harvesting timber forest products, but under ecosystem-based forest management principles, as well as our ability to help connect landowners to carbon offset markets. Ultimately, this land trust really aims to ensure that carefully managed forests remain forests by preventing conversion and overharvesting, really to maintain wildlife habitat and stored carbon, and to build resilient forests across the province. So I see there's some things coming up in the chat here, so there may be some questions, but there's a few more things I just wanted to share really quickly that are some other sort of projects that we've been working on in addition to building this foundation for the new land trust. So some other opportunities that will be available for landowners who hold easements. I'm not sure how many folks have heard about OECMs. I feel like it's become a really hot word lately. And when I first heard of it, I was like, I don't know what you're talking about. And I think some folks that are still working with OECMs are figuring it out along the way. So I throw up the big definitions so that we're all pretty clear on maybe what this intention is. But it's the OECM is an other effective area-based conservation measure. And it's a geographically defined area other than a protected area, which is governed and managed in ways that achieve positive and sustained long-term outcomes for the in-situ conservation of biodiversity with associated ecosystem functions and services, and where applicable, cultural, spiritual, socioeconomic, and other locally relevant values. So OECMs are an internationally recognized recognition of lands for conservation. It's tied to the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So it helps support provincial as well as federal objectives for protected areas and support of the pathway to Canada's Target 1. So the land trust, how it ties back to us and landowners in Nova Scotia, is within the easement creation and development of those conservation zones. They can include any old forests or forestry set-asides, and there's an opportunity for that to be recognized as an OECM to help contribute to the province and federal conservation goals. Additionally, hemlock woolly adelgid treatment support. HWA is an invasive pest that's impacting hemlock in Nova Scotia, starting in Southwest, sort of Yarmouth, Digby area is where the pest was first detected. I'm hoping you all know a little bit about HWA, but the high level is that most of our old forest is hemlock, and it is at high risk of decline and death by this invasive pest that feeds at the base of the needles. Within a few years of an infestation, can kill the tree. So there are some supports that are being made available to treat and prevent loss of hemlock in our province. And that's through the Nature Smart Climate Solutions Fund, the Environment and Climate Change Canada, ECCC, has agreed to commit up to $10 million, which will contribute to reducing greenhouse gas emissions and increase carbon sequestration while providing benefits for biodiversity and human well-being. And there is currently a new team and project underway as a sort of a new leg of the Medway Community Forest Cooperative, is a hemlock conservation team that is treating hemlock stands in conservation areas. They just started this spring with a trial in the fall. So there's more information on that. If you're interested, feel free to check out nshemlock.ca as well as the Community Forest website. We're just getting some more information on there about volunteer opportunities, but tying back to private woodlands, it can be a bit costly to treat trees. And for woodland owners who have hemlock, old forest hemlock in conservation zones within these easements, there may be funds available to help support treatment on easement properties. And finally, just bringing back the federal 2 billion trees commitment, and that we can help connect landowners for planting new trees, planting a diversity of species to support stand resiliency, habitat restoration, climate resiliency, and diversification. So that is what I had to share with you all today. Thanks so much for listening in, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Great. Thank you, Jennika. Like she said, does anyone have any questions?
Wendy here. I was curious about the OECM. It's a new term for me. And how is the designation delineated, or, it's great on paper, but what about out in the forest or on the maps?
It's a great question. There are a lot of tools online to understand how OECMs will be designated. There's a decision support tool, but really there's a few factors that must be in place on the land in the woodlands on the map for an OECM to be considered. And one of those factors is some sort of permanency. That's where the easement comes into place in allowing landowners access to OECM recognition, because anyone, I could own 1,000 acres and love it and grow it old and treat it well and steward carefully, but without any sort of additional permanency or additional structure within that land management, it isn't eligible for OECM recognition. So by having an easement and that structure, that legally binding agreement, is one way to help check the boxes toward OECM recognition. There are a few others, including, forest maturity, habitat suitability, the sort of ecological value as well. But I can send around some links around OECMs as well, because I'm not an expert on it. I'm still learning, and I think a lot of folks are, because it's quite a new term. But I'd be happy to share some resources and follow up with you.
Do we have, is there any designation so far in Nova Scotia? Or is the Nature Trust or Nature Conservancy on board on this opportunity, or because some their properties would perhaps be eligible without looking at the whole list, but certainly with easement and so on?
Definitely, it's all underway right now, and the Southwest Nova Biosphere is playing a big role in some of that evaluation. So any OECM recognition comes through the province through environment and climate change with staff there in partnership with the Southwest Nova Biosphere Reserve. And I know that they've been working with the land trust, and there's a working group around assessing properties. I think some of the examples they give, because it's that in situ conservation. So OECMs can be tied to things where the initial or the primary purpose of land isn't for conservation, but there ends up being a conservation benefit. So they give an example of a watershed area where development cannot occur in an area for water protection, and that in situ is forest conservation, land conservation, or a military base where there may be 10,000 acres, 5,000 acres for military purposes, but that in situ conservation, sort of the second benefit is forest conservation.
So I'm glad to hear it's not just forests, but as you said, marsh and other kinds of habitat. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for your question.
I see someone has their hand raised.
Yeah, Celeste Devar. I'm up in the Gasper Valley, South Mountain. I guess I'm curious about what next steps are. We're currently stewarding about 80 acres, and I'm curious what the requirements will be in terms of, not requirements, but what the steps are going to be that we can look forward to, and what are some things that we can do ourselves initially to get ready for any assessment of the land and moving towards preparing for an easement.
Yeah, great question. There are a few things to sort of that landowners can start doing to sort of prepare if they are interested in an easement as well. We do have a bit more information to share and resources just for folks to review and read to sort of, understand, because where you have the easement and the carbon agreement, we want to ensure that folks understand the full process. But in preparation, the land would have to have a forest management plan. So step one, if you don't already, would be to connect with, I'm sorry, I forget where you said you were located, if the Western Woodland Services Co-op may cover your area.
Up in the Gasper Valley, South Mountain, so Kings County.
Kings County. Yeah, I think that Western Woodland Services Co-op would service your area. If not, it would be the Federation of Nova Scotia Woodlot Owners. But you would request to have a management plan made through them. And the great news is it's subsidized by the province to have a management plan done. And you would just ask that it be an FSC certified plan. And the other requirement that we ask landowners to begin is boundary line maintenance, which a lot of folks do anyways, but it is something that requires continual maintenance, and it can get away from you. So we'll ask folks to go out and check their boundary lines and utilize tools. We've chatted about utilizing, Avenza maps and other ways for landowners to help navigate around their woodlands and be sure that their boundary lines are visible. But connecting with a woodlot service provider will help you set up for those.
That's helpful. I do understand the carbon exchange program because we've been part of the NCX program that has been in place for the last year. So that's coming to an end. So that's why we were looking at what are some other options that we can. So I really like the tying together of the carbon exchange program as well as the easement. That's a smart strategy. Thanks.
Yeah, great. I'm glad to hear you've been diving into the world of carbon offsets. I like to tell folks it's like an ever evolving, rapidly developing world. It's really exciting that we can um, access carbon offsets on the voluntary market. And we believe that a federal compliance market is on the horizon, and that's going to shake things up further. So yeah, it's I'm glad you've been involved in that program and looking for it's a 1 year. The NCX pilot is a 1 year harvest deferral methodology, where this is pivoting toward that longer term. It's based on that 100-year cycle, and it's a 40-year commitment. But that's great.
I love it. So just to be clear, if we decide that the entire sort of 75 acres that is currently in mixed Wabanaki, hemlock, red maple, red spruce, white pine is going to be all conservation, that is an acceptable part of the approach that we might take with the easement.
Yep. Yeah, that's something we can work through, definitely, and going through the delineation of the easement boundaries and different zones.
Thank you.
Thanks for your question.
Does anyone else have a question?
I was wondering what your approach might be in some of the communities where like clear cutting is still kind of seen as your only option, and kind of reaching people that might not be like connected to the community forest already, or kind of where I think their values might actually align with this, but they just might not kind of see it or have access to it in the same way.
Yeah, and I think in these conversations, happen a lot in this new family forest network around just sort of providing resources and information, as well as a connection to trusted harvesters and contractors can sometimes be an issue. Either just maybe an unawareness, a lack of knowledge sort of around other opportunities to continue management in a different style. But there is a big challenge for contractor capacity and having someone come in and do work on lands. And I think that I keep hearing from folks that have had that happen, where they may be new to the province or new to a region and maybe don't know who to trust to come in and do work in the lands. And they believe that, they hire someone, they know what they're doing, and then they end up having a clear cut or something that looks like a clear cut when that wasn't the intention. I've heard that from a number of folks. So I think this easement structure, as well as the family forest network and having these trusted partners, we can sort of build a wider reach, as well as a support sort of those ecosystem-based practices through this trusted network. We hope that easements and good forestry demonstration will encourage other folks to try new things and to try partial harvesting and uneven age forest management on their own lands. And I think what it comes down to for a lot of folks is economics and that sort of revenue generating opportunity, and where we hope through this easement and a diversity of program opportunities like the carbon offsetting, and we can show folks that there are other ways to generate revenue that don't need to fall to clear cutting.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for your question, Robin.
So I see in the chat that Joshua asks, is your 50-acre minimum tied to your registration with the Community Easement Act, or is that your own prerequisite?
Yeah, so it is not tied to the Act in any way, and it is sort of our intention to have a 50-acre minimum in the early years. Not to say that special exemptions would be made if a property were really interesting and maybe would really benefit from a community easement. And it was 47 acres. It's not so strict. And down the line, we may be able to be much more flexible in easement properties. I think in our early years, we want to at least ensure that we have 10,000 acres with as few landowners as possible, because you can get to 10,000 acres with 1,000 people or 50 people. And you just got to understand that administratively, we have to sort of prioritize in that way. But that doesn't mean I'm getting attacked by my cat right now. Sorry. In year 5 or down the line of this new land trust, the property size can vary significantly. Yeah, thanks for your question, Joshua.
So you said, Jennika, that the trust is about to launch. You're just kind of waiting on the minister to do their ministerial duty. So do you have 10,000 acres worth of properties like ready to be signed, or are you close, or just curious?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. We've been doing outreach we had a soft launch about a year ago where we had a CBC interview sharing about our intention. And we were like, oh, I guess we're public now. But it's great. We've been building this foundation and gaining a lot of awareness from landowners. And we have a list of interested folks that exceeds 10,000 acres. I think we're closer to 13,000 acres right now. But that is still in really early stages. We haven't gone to every one of those properties and assessed them and had in-depth conversations with everyone to ensure we've sort of been drafting all of our legal agreements and working with Jamie Simpson, a lawyer, an environmental lawyer, around drafting up these legal agreements. So we want to have all the interested landowners read through all the legalities with their lawyers, go through the process of visiting each property. I am just one staff person working on this right now, and through the fall, much of my focus was on grant writing and securing some private sector funding. So it's great news. We have a 3-year project to support new staff and to support assessing properties and launching. So that's sort of where we have this timeline. Is in order to secure and sort of finalize this private sector funding, we need to be able to hold easements in the Act or with some sort of special exemption in the next few months. I think we have till the fall. So we've been working away behind the scenes here, but in the next few months, we're at this point where we're ready to begin assessing properties and beginning drafting easements. And hiring on new staff. So I think we'll be seeing a launch in the coming months.
That's awesome. I see someone's asking, how can they sign up? How do they get added to your list?
So just emailing me, but on the website, nsworkingwoodlandstrust.org, you'll find a sheet there where you can fill out a bit of information. We ask for a little bit of information about yourself and the Woodlands. And so just sharing a bit of information will add you to the list of interested landowners and follow up with all information. I have a few different things to share with landowners to review. And then as we begin circulating those legal documents, we'll follow up with folks.
Are there any final questions?
I'll ask a question. I'm afraid I missed the first few minutes of the presentation. And despite having sat through it, I'm still not feeling that I'm entirely clear on what this trust is and I understand perhaps what's involved, but having missed the introduction, I have some questions. So I'm wondering, if I go to your website, would it be explained there that I can get more information?
Yeah. The website, I've heard from other people, not just my own opinion, that the website's really good and full of a lot of information where folks have gotten a ton of good information. There's also an FAQ that's quite detailed on our website, which may help answer some questions as well. Chad's recording this as well. So even when we wrap up, you can zoom back and watch the first 10 minutes. As well, I'd be happy to chat with you any other time. Shauna, I mentioned at the beginning too, this is a partnership and being incubated by the Medway Community Forest Cooperative. And we have our annual general meeting this Saturday in the Maitland, at the Maitland Bridge Community Hall. So it welcomes MCFC members as well as the general public, and we'll be doing a number of updates and information sharing, and then in the afternoon going out on a trail walk. So if they're available this Saturday, you can come spend the whole day with us.
That sounds lovely. Thank you. I have a final question, if that's possible. I do have quite a few hemlock on my property, and I also have the little woolly fellas hanging out. And I don't know if I have a possibility to have even some of the trees treated, and if you could steer me in the right direction for that.
Yes. If I think my email's up on front, well, yes. If you just shoot me a message, we can point you in the right direction. As well, Chad, you may be able to correct me, but nshemlock.ca, that's the website. That is full of information around HWA and options for having some treatments done. So reach out. I can point you in a few directions, as well as check out that website.
Okay, thanks very much for everything.
Yeah, thanks so much for tuning in.
And I will reach out. Thank you.
I have added the nshemlock.ca link into the chat window.
Okay, great.
So you can click on it.
It's one of those things where you've said it so many times, you're like, is it nshemlock.ca? Is it that simple? It's got to be.
Okay. There are no more questions. Thank you once again, Jennika. That was a very interesting talk and really exciting to see this project take off. And I would like to thank all of you for joining us tonight, and the Region of Queens for supporting us and our seminars. As always, you can stay up to date with our seminars by following the Mersey Tobiatic Research Institute on Facebook. And if you'd like to watch tonight's seminar again, you can check out our Facebook Live videos right now. So you just go to our Facebook page and hit videos, and it's up immediately. And within a few days, we'll have it on our YouTube channel as well. So with that, we hope everyone stays well, and we get to see you all again very soon. Thank you. Thank you, Jennika.
Thanks so much, Chad. Thanks everyone for joining in and for all your great questions. See ya.